Throughout history and beyond, before records exist, blood has held a special fascination for humans. As blood drinking to gain mystical powers seems to have been common to peoples all over the world, this belief probably goes back to the dawn of mankind. Some peoples of the Americas gave newborns blood as the first thing that ever passed their lips. While some people scoff at the idea of cultists still imbibing blood and think of vampires as creatures of legend, there are very well-attested instances of blood drinking, both that of animal and human origin, for medical, ritual, and fetishistic purposes. Sanguinarians is the modern term for those who drink blood from a psychological need or a lifestyle choice. Blood of the young and healthy was considered capable of conveying their vitality to others. Tyrants like the Roman Emperor Tiberius were said to have drank or bathed in the blood of children to gain strength. Similar legends regarding Gilles de Retz, the Marshal of France, and Countess Bathory are infamous. It is said King Louis XI of France drank the warm blood of infants in his final days of life in 1483 in a bid to restore his health. In 1492, Pope Innocent VIII, who suffered from ill health throughout his papacy, was constantly drowsy and fainting. He had suffered a stroke and was even thought to be dead in 1490 before reviving. He died in July 1492. In the 19th century appeared accounts which claimed that an attempt to cure the Pope was made by providing him with the blood of 3 10-year-old boys. One version of the story is that a cardinal suggested the blood transfusion, and that some years after that man suffered a hemorrhage and paid a Florentine boy a large sum of money to procure some of his blood. If the story is true, it must have been beneficial, for the cardinal recuperated and lived another 20 years. The circulation of the blood was first described medically by a Spanish doctor named Michael Servetus in 1553, but a proper understanding of the circulatory system was not established until 1628 by British physician William Harvey. Around 1668, French doctors endorsed the transfusion of blood from young people into the veins of older patients. At this time, blood groups were completely unknown, as it was not until 1900 that Dr. Karl Landsteiner at the University of Vienna discovered A, B and O, with AB discovered in 1901. This meant while some transfusions worked, others proved fatal, leading to their suppression by edict. It was reported in 1874 that consumptives in the last stages of the disease would make daily visits to the Paris slaughterhouses at La Villette to obtain animal blood to drink in a desperate bid to renew their health. Newcomers would often react with nausea and disgust, but those accustomed to the blood were said to be almost fervent in swilling it down. Tuberculosis, a bacterial disease, caused a quarter of all deaths in 19th century Europe, and even today a quarter of the world's population have been exposed to it. Improvements in sanitation and diet assisted in reducing epidemics in the early 20th century, and from the 1940s onwards antibiotics have kept it in check. Antibiotic-resistant strains have arisen, and with 1.4 million deaths in 2019, the disease remains one of the worst afflicting humanity, along with diarrhea and malaria. In Cincinnati, Ohio in 1876, a half-dozen blood drinkers regularly appeared at Lowenstein's slaughterhouse, while others visited Lawrence's a few streets away. Lowenstein's was favoured as the kosher ritual was considered to leave the blood more palatable than that of a beast slain with an axe. The blood from an animal slain by a choquette was bright and clear like a wine, while the latter was black and lifeless. A man at Lowenstein's told the press that they had 2 young women and 1 young man, who came every day. Once there used to be many more, he added, but they recovered their health and ceased coming. One young woman came for a year, who initially was emaciated to the appearance of a human skeleton, but after a year grew fat and healthy, he averred. At this point the choquette walked by carrying a long knife, and remarked that he was about to kill a bullock, and the reporter was offered a glass of blood. He accepted the offer on behalf of his story. A large tumbler was rinsed, and the animal's throat cut so that the blood could drain into the glass. It was warm and clear, and had no odour. After the first swallow went down well, he soon drained the tumbler. He compared the taste to the richest cream, with a tart sweetness. Around the same time it was claimed a young woman in New York of means arranged for private drinking of blood at an abattoir. After 10 months she regained her ruddy cheeks and put on 11 pounds in weight. Now a radiant beauty, she married the assistant of the medical adviser who had suggested the blood cure. Out of curiosity, her husband one day opened a small artery in his leg and allowed his wife to suck the blood to see if there was any difference between human and animal blood. His wife enjoyed the sensation so much that it became almost an addiction. Finally, tiring of her incessant need for his blood, he left her, allegedly moving to Peru. The woman, meanwhile, returned to drinking cattle blood. In January 1890, reports reached the Humane Society in Kansas City about a sect called the Samaritans, numbering about 20 people, who resided in Missouri. They had been formed around the teachings of a man named Silas Wilcox in about 1889. Among their beliefs was that drinking blood would cure diseases, based upon a Bible verse saying, "The blood was the life." The group made daily visits to the meat-packing plant to drink the blood of the freshly killed cattle, but Wilcox was not satisfied with drinking animal blood, and encouraged his followers to accept that drinking human blood was more beneficial. Wilcox himself drank the blood from the arm of a young devotee named Nancy Dixon, and claimed it had restored him to health within the day, encouraging the belief in the marvellous power of blood drinking among his adherents. At their meetings, the well would provide their blood to cure the ailing. An officer from the society visited the home of a man named John Wrinkle, who was bedridden in the late stages of tuberculosis. Also in the house were discovered 2 emaciated children, his daughter Minnie, aged 13, and his son John, who was 10. Wrinkle denied an accusation that he had been drinking the children's blood, but when their bodies were examined, numerous sores were found around the elbows. Wrinkle changed his story and said the children had volunteered to give him their blood to heal him. The children were removed from the home, and the case brought to the attention of the governor of the state. Wrinkle believed that in the Bible it said the well should make sacrifices for the sick. Even some medical doctors prescribed blood as a therapy. In Paris in 1890, a young woman who sprained her ankle was told to go to the slaughterhouse and bathe her ankle in warm bullock's blood. Meanwhile, doctors in Italy also had faith in blood as a restorative. In 1894, at the Zoutherinic Institute in Rome, patients would drink or bathe in blood to cure gout, rheumatism, and malaria. Nearly a quarter century after the first newspaper reports of blood drinkers at the Paris slaughterhouse at La Villette, men, women and children were still visiting to quaff blood. All were anemic, and most suffered from tuberculosis. One of the slaughtermen said the visitors ranged from the wealthiest to the poorest, and that the workmen got between 1 penny and 5 francs for supplying the blood. He added that many doctors recommended drinking blood in cases of debility and loss of appetite. A doctor who disagreed with blood as a cure noted that the fad was on the rise in New Orleans in 1900. Although again most were consumptives, many others feeling run down would imbibe blood as a tonic. A strange case occurred in Poland in November 1907, in the village of Wieleszew, not far from Warsaw. A farmer named Jan Zbro held a grudge against a neighbour named Josephine Ziolkow. To get at her, he conspired with his daughter Maria. One day Maria did not go to the fields to work, and their neighbours inquired where she was. Her father told them she was ill, and when they visited her, Maria said she had been milking a cow the night before, when Josephine bewitched her, removing all her strength. Maria added, "But I feel I shall be well if I drink some of the witch's blood." The deluded peasants went to Josephine's home and angrily beat the woman unconscious. Taking some of the blood that ran from her nose and ears, they took it to Maria, who, having drunk it, declared herself healed. Josephine dragged herself to the local priest, who called the police. Jan and Maria were arrested, but the villagers they had deceived could not be shaken from the belief that a witch had been justly punished. In Estremadura, Spain in 1920, police were hunting a vampire killer. A young shepherdess was found dead. She had been mutilated and drained of blood. There was a wound in her throat and a bloodied bowl left nearby, which suggested her blood had been drunk. A young boy was reported killed in a similar manner, and it was noted that human blood was still used in folk medicine. It is unknown if the culprits were caught. On the 14th of March 1931, a 39-year-old man named Peter Matson, who worked as a motor driver, but who was also a former butcher, wrestler, weightlifter, and boxer, claimed that he was used to drinking a cup of blood every night and possessed a knife to cut throats to get blood to drink. Later that night, Matson said he found another man named Ernest Nem sitting on the bed with Matson's wife at a boarding house in Burke Street, Sydney, and stabbed him 3 times. Matson was acquitted when Nem couldn't say for certain he saw the knife in Matson's hand. Matson caused other trouble on other occasions, and whether his claims of drinking blood are true or not is unknown. Dr. Hunt, a Sydney physician, in 1938 wrote to the Australian Medical Journal to alert the medical community to a young woman who gained access to hospitals via faking illness so she might obtain drugs. She had used a dye called Primrose Red to simulate bleeding, but when admitted to Sydney Hospital was found to have an 1/8-ounce bottle full of blood. She quickly dressed and left after its discovery. This young woman was presumably Thelma Grace Mawson, who was 25 when she was arrested for stealing clothing from a Sydney store on the 31st of August 1943. It was noted Thelma was a drug addict who obtained employment in hospitals to gain access to drugs. She is mentioned as working at Gundagai Hospital in 1936. Failing obtaining a job, she would drink human blood and then regurgitate it in hospitals so that she would be given morphine. A case came before the courts in Tully in northern Queensland in December 1940. An Aboriginal man named Mick Birdwood had been murdered by another Indigenous man called Tommy Springcart, allegedly because Mick had misconducted himself with his niece, Julia. It was considered unlikely that anything improper had occurred, and that even if it did, Tommy was a member of the Upper Murray people, and Mick and Julia were members of the Silkwood people. Therefore Tommy had no say over the matter. Rather, it was believed that Tommy, paying attention to Julia, who was the tribal wife of another man, had angered Mick, whom Tommy killed. Mick was hit on the back of the head with a tomahawk while he sat in grass behind a store, then speared through an artery. The chest was stabbed after death with a penknife to provide an amount of blood for a ritual where the blood was drunk to infuse Tommy and his friends, Spider and Moxley, with the power which Mick had held during life. Tommy sucked the blood first, then urged the other men to follow suit. This type of blood ritual was noted by Europeans as being not uncommon in far north Queensland at the time. Another case involving a man named Wild Jimmy had occurred in 1934 at Cairns. He was convicted of manslaughter and of drinking the dead man's blood and sent to jail for 5 years. After they drank the blood, Tommy cut chunks of flesh from Mick's body, which Tommy ate, but which Moxley and Spider refused to eat, although they took theirs home with them. Then Birdwood's body was cut so it would not float, and was thrown into the Tully River. Spider and Moxley were both younger members of Tommy's tribe, and it was considered they had acted within their tribal beliefs and under the sway of the older Tommy, and they were discharged. Tommy was sentenced to life imprisonment, although the judge intimated that if it could be proven he had acted according to tribal law, the sentence could be substantially reduced. A case involving one university student's strange cult came to light in Italy in 2020. Mateo Valderini had styled himself the Devil, and led a cult of teenagers in the forests of Prato in Tuscany in 2018 and 2019. He would bite on the arms of his followers, whom he had lured with the promise of English lessons, to gain blood to drink. He had also encouraged them to drink a mixture of blood and semen, promising they would gain supernatural powers. He was caught when naked photos he had of the teenagers were deemed to be pornographic. Aside from scandalous cases of murderers drinking the blood of their victims, and make-believe vampires with phlebotomy kits, in the 21st century science has returned to countenancing blood drinking, as in centuries past. Experiments with blood transfusions of a person's own blood to increase oxygen transportation began as early as 1947. The Australian military admitted they were researching the technique, more usually known as blood doping and associated with professional athletes, in 1998. Blood doping in sport has been considered cheating since 1986, but was used from the 1960s. Experiments involving mice were conducted at Stanford University in 2014, which showed that there was an apparent benefit to older mice to be transfused with the blood of younger mice. At the University of California, a protein in blood plasma called CREB was identified as a substance which assisted in repairing the brains of older mice. Other studies at Harvard showed another protein, named GDF11, showed promise for slowing down aging. Based on studies like these, intravenous therapy has found a market in 21st century America for transfusions of blood from donors aged between 16 and 25, despite the technique remaining experimental and unproven. A company named Ambrosia, created in California by Jesse Karmazin, began selling blood plasma gathered from young donors in 2017. For $8,000 a litre, a purchaser could be transfused with the plasma in the hopes of slowing down or reversing ageing and rejuvenating the organs. The Food and Drug Administration announced in February 2019 that there was no proven benefit from this technique, prompting Ambrosia to temporarily halt transfusions, but they were operational again by June of the same year, before announcing that the company had ceased business in August. The same month, Karmazin started a new company called IV Plasma, which provided blood from donors of any age to circumvent a legal technicality that age-specified plasma was considered a new drug. A Spanish pharmaceutical company named Grifols invested $50 million in a company called Alkahest, founded in 2014 by Tony Whisk-Corray, the scientist who had undertaken the experiments on mice to examine the role of protein changes in ageing and how to combat it by rejuvenating the blood supply. The age of the Blooddrinkers is far from being a relic of the past, found only in the dark corners of history.